everybody, I'm Amber Rose, the religious hippie, and I host the podcast A Catholic's Perspective. Join me every 2 weeks as I release episodes targeted towards helping young Catholics navigate their ever-changing secular world while staying strong in their faith. Whether you are a Catholic or not, all are welcome here. So if this is something that interests you, feel free to tune in. You can find A Catholic's Perspective on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. I hope to see you there. Bye!
Hello and welcome to the Karate Priest Podcast. I'm your host, Father Daniel Duplantis. I'm a martial artist, musician, airman, and a priest of the Diocese of Houma-Thibodaux. One of my other passions in life is teaching, especially teaching about the Catholic faith. Catholicism is a very deep faith. Jesus himself told Peter to put out into the deep for a catch. The most significant answers to life's most important questions often lie deep beneath the surface. Many people have questions about their faith. Through this podcast, my aim is to explore these questions and encounter incredible people along the way. Their stories show that God is constantly at work in our lives every single day, sometimes in the ordinary and sometimes in the extraordinary. Some of the topics treated in this podcast may be sensitive or controversial, but their discussion holds the key to truly living as God created us to live, which is to say that He created us to live in authentic freedom, loving Him above all else. Thank you for joining me on this journey of faith, and I hope you enjoy this podcast. Hey guys, and welcome back to the Karate Priest Podcast. I am your host, Father Daniel Duplantis, and today we have a very special guest, as we normally always do, but I was really excited when Todd set this one up for me because in my line of work as a priest, a lot of the things that we do have to do with ministering to the dying, and so especially being assigned here at the cathedral in my diocese, we tend to have a lot of funerals. We tend to have a lot of last rites at the hospital because the hospital is really just 2 minutes away from here. In fact, our hospital chaplain for the local hospital lives here at the cathedral with us. And so in this kind of ministry to the dying, today we wanted to bring on a very special guest who is a hospice nurse. And so our guest today is Julie McFadden. Julie, welcome to the Karate Priest.
Hello, thank you for having me. So nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Julie. So go ahead and just as an introduction, just tell us about yourself. Who are you? Where are you from? And then maybe how did you get into your role as a hospice nurse?
Yes, so my name's Julie. I live in Los Angeles, but I'm from Pennsylvania. I've been a nurse for 15 years and hospice for probably 7 of those years. The other time I was in the ICU mostly. And I got into nursing kind of on a whim, just being young and my friend was doing it. And, there were other reasons, but nothing profound really. And just over the years, I started to get really into understanding death and dying and having that conversation with people and wanting to do it sooner rather than later, just from working in the ICU, which brought me to hospice. And then I started 2 years ago going on the internet as Hospice Nurse Julie. That's my internet name, where I started just educating the general public about death and dying, because I think it's such a misunderstood thing that happens to all of us, and just trying to decrease fear through education.
That's wonderful. And I agree so much with that. I feel like death is something that I think some people more than most just have a hard time coping with, whether it be, a fear of death or just, I find that there's so much mess that can happen in the wake of a death, especially unexpected deaths. And so what do you think really, I guess is kind of like the underlying factor behind, perhaps people either fearing death or just how do they deal with death?
I think I think it's a complicated question, but in general, I think it's just the unknown, right? The unknown. And it's scary to think we don't know technically for sure what happens after we die. We don't know what death is going to be like or when it's going to happen. So all of that unknowing, at least I can speak for myself, right? I don't really fear death anymore because I'm around it so much and just personal spiritual experiences I've had. But I still can relate to feeling fear because of not knowing something. It feels so much safer when things are certain, and death is just not like that. So there's a lot of fear around it, and we don't really have it in our daily lives anymore. What I mean by that is, like, I think, 100 years ago, we would have wakes in the home and people would die in the home. You'd be around it a little more. Whereas now it's been really hospitalized, which I hope we start shifting away from that. But so it's always in the hospital usually. So people don't see it that much with their loved ones. So when they do, they really freak out because they don't know what to expect and what's this and what's that and why is this happening and they must be suffering. And that's just not necessarily true. We're just not used to seeing it.
Wow. Yeah. That's a lot to unpack right there. Because, because besides being a priest, I'm an Air Force chaplain and I'm going to active duty next month. And
Wow.
one of the books that's a standard read, especially for not just the Air Force chaplain corps, but for all 3 chaplain corps for the U.S. military. I can't remember the author's name, but I think he's a retired lieutenant colonel. It's called On Killing. And he brings up that specific point you just did about the fact that, like, most people are not around death on a regular basis. I mean, you think of even just, before like the days of like processed food, where, now we have these massive farms that, that they're, like, you think of like Tyson chicken or something, that like their whole job is to raise chickens for slaughter. And most people don't see that. Whereas, for centuries, if you wanted to eat meat, you had to go kill it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And so in a sense, we've become desensitized from killing. But then on the other hand, you look at things like video games, especially things like maybe Call of Duty, where like it kind of really regularizes killing, but it kind of numbs you to it. So I think between those two extremes, people don't have an accurate kind of witnessing of what death really is, just like you said, and being in the hospital. Yeah. I remember the first time that I watched a patient in the ICU get taken off the life support. And for me, like, I had seen people die in front of me before as a priest, but it was to watch the family suffer through watching their loved one, especially because the person was not very old. I think they were maybe 44 or 45 years old. To watch the family suffer in the wake of that was heart-wrenching. Like, when I left the hospital, like, I tried to hold it together walking out the doors. I got in my car and I cried because I don't think I was ready to watch the family suffer.
Yeah.
So that's incredible. Yeah, I love how you brought up those points.
Well, it's going to be sad, right? Like you said, watching a family lose their loved one, right? That is sad. So the grief doesn't get taken away. But I think what would be helpful in those moments, and I didn't even do this as an ICU nurse because I didn't know, like, death kind of a lot. I didn't actually understand like how the body did it, what was happening and why it was happening. So I couldn't even explain to the family, like, they're going to breathe like this sometimes, or they're going to sound like this, or them looking like whatever they look like is okay and normal. Because even though I was around it, I didn't understand it. But as a hospice nurse, after being a hospice nurse for like a year or so and being around it and seeing what death looked like, it was like, it was almost, for lack of a better word, like miraculous. Like, it makes me feel like, wow. But like, if anything, being around death all the time makes me believe in something greater, because our bodies are so miraculous and they like know how to die and they know how to do all these things to help us die. And my point to saying all this is that, like, the grief is still there, right? And they're still suffering from that. But I think understanding and understand that their loved one isn't necessarily suffering through that really can help with that process. And it won't be as traumatizing, because I hear so many families tell me, I saw my loved one do this, I saw my loved one do that. I'm traumatized by their last breath. And then I hear actually what it looked like and how it was. And I want to validate how they feel, of course, but also it's like, oh man, they probably were fine. You just not fine, but they weren't suffering. You just don't know what death looks like. So then they hang on to this like traumatic to them last image, when really the last image was okay. It's just that's what death looks like, and they just don't know that, right?
Right.
So there's still always, that's a long-winded, like grief is always there, right? But also having some understanding of how it looks can make it feel more sacred than scary.
Oh yeah, I love that as a priest, sacred.
Yeah, it can be sacred. It's easy for me to say, right? I'm not the one like losing this person, and I will have my days when that does happen, and it has happened. But like, if we can kind of shift our mind to where, because my grief is removed when I'm watching someone die, because I don't know them very well, right? To an extent, I see the sacredness in it because I understand it. And I want others to see and understand that too.
Yeah. And I think especially for the families themselves, to see that the professionals see death as something sacred. You're not just they're not just another family. They're not just another patient for you. Like you see you see the whole itself as something sacred. And I think that speaks volumes to the family to see that, the fact that, that you're there to care for them and the family. And that's just, yeah. And I love how you bring up like grief, because grief is a process, you just mentioned that. And I think a lot of people don't know how to grieve. I think a lot of people resist the process. And I think the resistance is part of the process. I mean, you look at like, and I think there's some discrepancy as to what the steps actually are and perhaps the order of them. But like, one of the first steps of the grieving process is denial. So like right there implies some resistance to grieving itself. But then, once you kind of get out of that, and then anger, like anger is like right after denial. I think if you can get through those first two steps, which is where like the really kind of make or break things happen, if you can kind of get through that, I think the rest of it kind of eventually subsides. But, but yeah, and I love how you bring up too, like, yes, like, in especially for hospice care, when people die on hospice, a lot of the time it is more peaceful, to see that. And again, like that last breath may be traumatizing for somebody. But again, like you say, the person's not in pain. Oftentimes like that's your job is to help make sure that the person dies peacefully and not in pain.
Yeah. And to understand that like at the end of life, almost everyone, especially on hospice, if they're dying a natural death, even if it's from a disease, right? But we're not doing anything to intervene, right? They're going to look different. They're going to breathe different. Their mouths are open, their eyes are open. They have gurgly breath. Like they might not, it's not like necessarily pretty sometimes, right? But that doesn't necessarily equate to suffering.
Yep.
And people need to know that, because most people think it does. Most people think they're drowning to death because they hear that gurgly noise, which is not true. That's not true. The changes in breathing when they're breathing really rapid or breathing really slow or shallow or deep or making noises, that's a metabolic change chemically in the body that's causing the body to do that. And the less we mess with that, the better it usually is. So, but it just, if you're not used to seeing it, it can be like, oh, for sure, my loved one's suffering. Look how they look, and it's just so rarely talked about, even as healthcare workers. When I was in the ICU, I didn't know that stuff. I knew a lot of stuff. Like ICU nurses know a lot of stuff, right? But like when it came to that stuff, I didn't know. I just didn't know. We didn't talk about it. Yeah. It's wild.
And I feel like especially, one of the great things between both of our fields is mentorship. I hear so much because I have so many friends who, they're just starting nursing. Because my first assignment was at a college campus, and so we had a lot of our Catholic students there at the student center who were in nursing school. We have a very big nursing school here at the local university, and I run into them all the time at the local hospitals because I'm constantly getting called. It's funny to see them going from student to actually like working in like the ICU and in just different departments in the hospital. And I think one thing they all say helps them so much is the mentorship, having those nurses who, like you say, who now know their stuff and can kind of help walk them through the process. And I think that's huge, especially if you're going to work in something like ER or ICU. I think the mentorship is huge. So I really just commend you for doing that, and passing on that knowledge. I think that's important.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for all you do.
Oh man. Yeah. And so I want to ask you, because we've kind of talked a bit about, I guess, more like the kind of either theoretical stuff or maybe just non-specifics in a way. I want to hear some specific stories, because you mentioned, the things that you have seen, have kind of changed the way you see what you do. So I want to hear some of that. Like, what's some of the stories that you've seen, some cases maybe you can talk about? Obviously I know there's HIPAA laws and things like that, but kind of like with us, with like confession and stuff, we can talk in some generalities. We just can't connect names and sins kind of thing,
Yeah.
I want to hear some of this. Like, what kind of helped make you see and want to do what you do now with your role, especially like on social media?
Well, I think so. I will do specifics, but honestly, to speak generally, because that's like the biggest thing that has changed is like over the first couple of years in hospice, right? Is when I just saw multiple deaths kind of over and over and over again. My whole view of death really changed, because it was like, if we're going to do it, right, we're all going to die. And some people, it's more tragic than others and more sudden than others. But like, if there's to me, hospice, like dying a natural death on hospice is a beautiful way to do it. And I know people don't like having beautiful and death in the same sentence, but like that has been my experience, because as an ICU nurse, it wasn't necessarily like that. We weren't good at talking about it. We weren't good at processing it with the family and allowing the body to do its natural thing, right? And when I saw that in general over the first couple of years of switching those roles, it was so mind-blowing to me and so fascinating to see how the body really does know how to die. And the less we mess with that, the more peaceful it is and the more sacred it can feel. And like, people always ask me if I've seen like the soul leave the body. And I haven't seen the soul leave the body, or at least I don't know I have. But what I do notice is when you're in a room with an actively dying patient, which means like a few hours to a few days where they're unconscious, they're breathing, they're breathing differently, they're going to die, any minute or within the next few hours or so, the room feels different. Like, I always describe it as like when I witness like someone giving birth, which I haven't in real life, but like on videos and stuff, because I'm a nurse, right? I will weep, me personally. Like if I see a baby being born, there's something that happens that makes me be like, because it's just so beautiful. Like seeing this birth of a new human. That is the same feeling I get when I watch someone take their last breath. It's like, and I think I can feel it because, like I said, the grief's removed. It's not my mother, right? I'm not losing a mom. So just to be the person who's kind of there witnessing and helping, and that was surprising to me, that I had this feeling of like, whoa, it's like you're so close to, for a lack of other word, the other side, right? I can't think of a better way to call it right now, but like, I just feel like there is something else, and I can see it when there's babies being born, and I can see it when someone's dying. It's like, we're so close to a place that we once knew, that I think we're all going back to. And it feels sacred and beautiful. And so that's the general thing of what has changed in me. And I've always had a feeling of that ever since I've been little, but it's really solidified. And I did not see that in the ICU. Probably was still happening, right? But I just you don't feel it. Doesn't feel, because it feels rushed and scary. And like with hospice, it's kind of like we prepare, we know what's going on. Usually it looks the same. It takes a while, right? So that's like a generality speaking, but I have had specific stories where, in hindsight, of course, when it's happening, I don't really know what's going on, because it's not like I'm naturally inclined to like believe in angels, or I'm really not, that's not really my personality, but I feel like I have seen an angel. So like, that's something I feel like I've seen an angel. That's one story. I have like a miracle story where someone was actively dying, which means like I thought they were going to die that night. They came on to service actively dying. And this is just one story I'll tell. And like cyanotic, which means they were blue, like they were like not coming back. Like people don't come back from this and be well anyway. They could maybe come back and be brain dead or something, right? But so this person was actively dying. I thought they were going to die in the next few hours. So I was actually trying to hang around the house thinking like, I'm just going to stay here until they die. Because it was kind of sudden. The children were young, like they were in their 20s, like not really ready. So I was kind of like hanging out with the family, trying to prepare them because no one knew what was going on. And I was trying to educate like, okay, your loved one's going to be dying soon. Here's why. They look very comfortable. So I was thinking they were going to die. And then her children were in the other room, making plans and calling family members to get everyone kind of situated. And I remember standing in her room, just making sure she looked comfortable. And I am changing like things around. So just for HIPAA reasons, but just so everyone knows, I'm not just like telling the story, giving the exact information. But, so I'm like by her bed when, and I thought she looked really comfortable. And then suddenly in my mind's eye, out of nowhere, I saw this like image of this like massive thing. Again, this all happened pretty quick. So it was like in hindsight, this massive thing that I felt like sort of felt like an angel or something really powerful that was hers. And I was kind of like, okay, what was that? I'm just going to leave that there and go back to the kids and talk to them. And then I eventually had to leave, right? So I leave, I go home. I thought for sure she was going to die that night. And I'd wake up in the morning and they'd say like, so-and-so went to go do a death visit, whatever. So I wake up in the morning, no death visit email. And I'm like calling the office being like, who went to go do the death visit? So-and-so was dying last night. No one ever called. So I'm like, what the heck? So I call her kids being in the morning, being like, what happened? Or like, what's going on? Kind of like, when did she die? Why didn't you call us? And they were like, oh my gosh. Yeah, no, everything's good. And I don't think they fully understood what was happening because they were not as surprised as I was. They were like, oh, everything's good. She's up and hungry and eating pancakes. And I could hear people laughing in the kitchen. And I'm like, sorry, that was me slamming my hand on my table. I'm like, oh, what? I didn't, of course I don't act like that. I'm just like, wait, what? And they're like, yeah, it's like eating. She said she was hungry, wanted pancakes. I'm like, I'm gonna come over. That's exactly what I said. I go, can I come over and just check on you guys? Because I could not believe it.
Oh, gee.
She is awake, alert, and oriented, eating, laughing, talking, walking. This person that is literally impossible. That is a complete miracle, impossible. That could not happen. She was very close to death. Like she wasn't oxygenating her brain, right? Like oxygen was not getting to her brain the night before, for sure. Just because I've been a nurse for a long time, right? And yeah, so I go there and then I was thinking maybe it's the rally where someone had like a really crazy rally where like they're almost dead and then they perk up and then they die really quick. So then I was thinking maybe that's what's happening. Some weird like surge rally thing where she's like just surging and then she's going to die really soon. Nope. She did die, but not for 3 months. She lived for another 3 months and fully well, like walking, talking, like spending time with family, like doing all these things for 3 full months and then did die peacefully. So going for a long time, I denied the vision that I had because I was like, I don't know what that was. I feel embarrassed. I don't want to tell people I saw an angel. But the more I was like, the more something kind of told me like, no, you know what you saw, which I never have seen since or before. But I feel like it was an angel and it was very large. What I'll say, it was like a huge, large, kind of like, those Mother Mary statues. Yeah, you're a priest.
Oh yeah. Uh-huh.
That are like, kind of like, that are in every garden where they're like huge and kind of like standing like this and Mother Mary's like looking down.
Oh yeah, especially in South Louisiana, that's in every single Cajun grandma's front yard.
There you go. Yeah. It was like that, but not Mother Mary. Didn't give me that vibe. It just was like a big stoic and not soft, powerful, like totally powerful. Didn't care that I was there, but I wanted nothing to do with me. It was like the feeling was, this is mine. She's mine. I'm with her. Right.
Oh, wow.
And it did feel like there was wings, but they were tucked back and it was all tan in my mind. And I feel like that was her angel or her guardian angel or something. And I think that because of the miracle, like I used to only tell that story by saying, oh, it's my miracle story, and say the miracle, right? Of how like she was very close to death and then just suddenly came back for 3 months. And I left out the angel part because I was too afraid to tell anyone. And then finally I was like, you know what? Just say it. I mean, I'm not claiming I know, right? I have no idea what the heck that was, but I don't want to leave that part of the story out anymore, because that was part of the story that I just never told anybody because I was too afraid.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, you know, in at least in the Catholic Church, you know, we believe that every single human being has a guardian angel assigned to them. And like that angel's one job is to be there, like to intercede for us, to protect us. You know, there's often this thing that we say that if you fall asleep praying your rosary, your guardian angel finishes the rosary for you, kind of thing. You know, they're like there to pray for you, you know, and to help protect you. And it's like that's just amazing to hear that. And the way you describe the angel makes me think of when I was in the seminary in New Orleans. The kind of basement of our seminary was our gym, and we had like all kind of exercise equipment and stuff, and we had a priest who came in and did this chalk drawing of Saint Michael the Archangel. And he drew Saint Michael as just absolutely shredded. Like Michael looks buff. I mean, this dude looks like he's been benching Satan all day. Like he just looks like I said, like not soft at all, but like I'm here to protect somebody, you know. And so I just love how you describe what you saw. But then, and I think too of a particular gospel passage, you know, with what you said about the woman who gets up and like eats. You know, it makes me think of after the resurrection. There's an account where Jesus appears to the disciples in the locked room, right? And the only one who saw Jesus actually die on the cross was John. He's the only apostle who was there at the foot of the cross. The rest were so traumatized just with the arrest that they couldn't even stand to watch the suffering and death. But here's Jesus who appears to them, and the first thing he asked is, "Do you have something to eat?" It's like here's like the resurrected Jesus who, like, you know, John saw die. And one of the first things to do, like, to show the fact that I am indeed alive, is to eat something in front of me.
Wow. Yeah.
So that's what that story reminds me of that as well. So I'm like, oh wow, that's just good stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And it's kind of cool to me because I think if I had an image of an angel, right, like that's not the thing that would be in my head of what an angel would be. That's why I find it so interesting, is that like in real to me, because if I were to have made up an angel in my head, it wouldn't be like that. It wouldn't be what I saw in my mind's eye. It's like, it would have been softer and smaller and a little more wingy and like sparkly, like twinkle, like Tinkerbell-ish, right? And that was not what I saw. It was like you said, a very strong, powerful being.
Yeah.
It was amazing. Yeah. So that's just one story, but I have several other stories. Like, I mean, not angel stories, but things kind of like that. But in general, it's this overwhelming feeling of like, of sacredness that I can't deny. You can't deny it.
Yeah. That's incredible. Oh, I love that. And you have so much on your social media pages, just videos and stuff. And so I'm sure you have a lot of stories also, like, I guess, in there as well. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, because that's the one thing we like to do with our guests is to kind of, you know, to ask you guys, like, how can we find, you know, more of like your testimony, because there's only so much we can cover in a podcast episode, you know. But to say to direct the listeners as to like, where can we find you to hear more of these stories, to hear more about your work, you know. So can you kind of explain to the listeners, how can they find you on the interwebs?
So I am at Hospice Nurse Julie. That's my name on the internet, Hospice Nurse Julie, really on any social media platform. So Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok. I think to me, YouTube is like the best place, I think, because I do longer form videos there. They're easier to find, but like not everyone likes YouTube. So I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, I'm on TikTok. And I do have a website, hospicenursejulie.com, where you can find more things too. And I have a newsletter, kind of all the things, right? It just depends on how much you want to get into it, right? It's like, I have everything there on my pages, and it depends on what you're looking for.
That's
I am
awesome.
ready I am writing a book, you guys, but the book's not going to be out until June. Yeah. June 2024. So it's like a full year. So I hate to even like say it because there's just so much time until it actually comes out. Who knew it takes so long to write a book? I didn't know.
I just wrote one and we published it Easter Sunday. So I
really?
I just went through that whole writing process. So,
yes.
But kudos to you, and keep up with that, because I think you do have something very important to be said. And definitely, having just been through that process myself with all the doubts that came with it too, just
oh my gosh.
Keep trudging through with that. I mean, that's incredible. So please, keep me posted on that. We'll keep sharing that, because we always like to, if we can, to revisit guests and to say, hey, look, remember this person we had on the podcast, like their book just came out, like, so
yes.
go ahead and get it. So please keep Todd and I abreast of that. But other than that, I mean, thank you so much for coming on today. This was wonderful, again, because this is such a topic that, as you said, is so sacred. And everybody goes through this. Everybody's going to die at some point. Everybody, I think, sees death at some point in life. And certainly with what you do, you help to make that, like your job, your calling is to help to make that process as I guess easier to face as possible. Yeah. Not to say that it is easy, but easier.
And I think education does that. Like I'm sorry to interrupt you because I know we're wrapping things up, but I always want to say too, like, yes, I have a bunch of what I think are cool or not cool stories of like why I believe there's an afterlife and things like that, which are important, and that is cool and comforting. But that's not my main point. My main point is to just educate the general public about what it looks like and what death and dying looks like on a biological level, to decrease fear, right? Just to decrease fear in general, give you a little more sense of control over something that can feel really out of control,
Awesome. Wonderful. Well, again, Julie, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much. You're so
all right. Thank you. All righty, guys. With all that being said, that will conclude today's episode of The Karate Priest. Thank you for joining, and we will see you guys next time. Thank you for joining us for today's episode of The Karate Priest. If you enjoyed this podcast, go ahead and like The Karate Priest on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you're ever in South Louisiana, come visit me at the Cathedral of St. Francis de Sales in Houma. If you have any questions or comments about the show, you can also email me at thekaratepriest@gmail.com. Your questions are welcomed and may be used in future episodes. May the blessing of Almighty God, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit come down on you and remain with you forever. Amen.
A quest is a search for something. And every week, the Quest podcast will show you how we know what we know through interviews with people that have incredible stories of dedication and perseverance. I'm your host, Todd Fisher. Join me in this thought-provoking and inspiring podcast of discovery. Find us anywhere you listen to podcasts. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Please be sure to rate and review this episode. This podcast is produced by Todd Fisher and Anthony Smith and is distributed by Metacortex Publishing. This podcast is copyright. Any previously trademarked or copyright content is used by permission. Information and opinions stated in this podcast should not be construed as medical advice. Please be sure and visit the official website for Metacortex Publishing at metacortexpublishing.com or find us on social media for other unique content.